Introduced by
Recording in progress.
Thanks. Yeah, so we'll do the usual format, 45 minutes or so, presentation followed by question discussion. We have Anne in the back who's monitoring the chat, the Q&A and online. Folks will be joining us online as well, so I'm looking forward to presentation discussion.
Awesome, thank you, Joe. So hi everyone here in the room and everyone online. Thank you for joining us at the Berman Institute seminar. My name is Khadija Ferryman. I'm core faculty here at the Berman Institute and also assistant professor in the Department of Health Policy and Management. And I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Dr. Jasmine McNealy, who will be speaking with us today. So Jasmine McNealy is an attorney, critical public interest technologist, and social science researcher who studies media and technology with a view toward influencing law and policy. Her research focuses on privacy, surveillance, and data governance within the context of emerging media and technology. She's an associate professor at the University of Florida, currently on sabbatical at the moment, a technology advisor at the Federal Trade Commission, a visiting fellow at the Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Policy at the Harvard University Kennedy School, and also faculty associate at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University. She's also founder and principal of the Alvieri LLC. And just in terms of background, she's had undergraduate work in journalism and Afro-American studies, a master's in education and measurement evaluation, statistics and assessment from the University of Illinois at Chicago, and a PhD and a JD from the University of Florida, PhD in mass communication and JD. So we are so honored to have you today. Welcome, everyone join me. Please welcome me, Dr. Jasmine McNealy.
So thank you, Khadija. Thank you, Berman Institute, for the invitation. I did smile really brightly on the sabbatical note because it is something I have been waiting for a while. But yes, my name is Jasmine McNealy. I am at the University of Florida, mostly in the College of Journalism and Communications, in the department of, it's called MPMT, which stands for Media Production, Management, and Technology. So it's a large, unwieldy department where people do a lot of different things, and we just say, hey, that's great. My focus, a lot of my research is emerging media, emerging technology in its various forms, in its various contexts, and what it means for people and organizations. What I mean is, if we allow the use of innovation and innovative tools that we want for things like efficiency, effectiveness, speed, whatever, what are the implications for us in the long run? And then what are the implications for people who are already marginalized or vulnerable with respect to how those tools may be used and in specific contexts? So today I'm talking about this idea of a remedy for some of the things that you, or some of the situations that you may be familiar with that are happening on a weekly, if not daily basis with regard to big tech, small tech, medium-sized tech, as well as government and civil society as well, right? So we focus a lot on big tech. We also note that government has this symbiotic relationship a lot of the times with tech organizations. And then we forget sometimes about civil society and complicitness with the use of innovation and technology in ways that are supposed to be helpful, but are not necessarily so for all the people affected. So I want to talk about this kind of remedy I thought about and have been thinking about for a while. And it's a play on two things that are kind of, one is kind of old and staid and not really thought about with respect to data and technology. And the other one has gained a lot of popularity over the past, I would say, a couple of years. It's not new, but it's gained a lot of popularity. It is one of those perhaps constructs that has been touted as needing pilots, and perhaps if we pilot this, it could be helpful for governments, and what do we do with the commons, the data commons? I'm mashing those together to see if this is a possible remedy for these situations we keep finding ourselves in with respect to the collection of personal information. Wide swaths, voluminous pools of personal data that people may have consented, and we could talk about consent a lot, right? People may have consented to have collected, but may not have known the bounds, if there are any, of how that data may be used into perpetuity. And also that data that's collected without consent, that data that is collected specifically knowing that people would say no if they knew that you were behaving in these ways. So the idea is the constructive data trust, and we could talk about that. I know some of this is going to be very law, but there's a rationale for it. And constructive trusts are a part of law that is ignored quite a bit, and that's the law of equity. And thinking of remedies for people to put you in a place that you would have been in had the bad thing not have happened to you. So it's about restitution. Can we think of a way for data to be restitutionary is the question. And what could that possibly look like for situations that we continue to face with respect to new things happening? Look, I'm saying, like, every week we see a situation like this. It's not new, it's not shocking anymore. It is like, man, why do we keep using this? Oh yeah, because it's fun or interesting or whatever the case may be. So TikTok and others scrape your data whether you use their apps or not. What? So I can have TikTok on my phone. I actually do have TikTok on my phone. I can have TikTok on my phone, but if I'm not using it or if I've logged out specifically, TikTok is still collecting my data. And what about those people that I send, oh, hey, watch this video. It's really funny. So now I'm implicating them in the dragnet of data too, according to these studies. And TikTok is not alone. We know that, right? So it's TikTok, there's Facebook, there's Google. There are other companies that you may or may not have ever heard of. Smaller apps, those apps that are supposed to help you with productivity, are supposed to help you with tracking your, nutrition. Those very small apps that we don't pay attention to because, oh, well, this is a helpful app, right? But they're also scraping and collecting data. Another recent and a reoccurring situation. I tried to keep my pregnancy secret. It was impossible, basically. So a woman finds out she's pregnant, doesn't want advertisers to know. She's, a journalist. She understands that, organizations are looking to sell us stuff. Of course, back in, I think it was 2012, there was the big, Target knew the teenager was pregnant before her dad knew and was sending those, coupons and sales paper. But this is a continuing thing, right? Certain things that we have affinities towards, things that we search for, things that we, will be looking at can tell a lot about us. Why? Because there are patterns in the data. So how do I keep pregnancy or reproductive health or any other kind of health secret from people I don't want to know about what's going on with me in various ways? Another interesting one, there's a big scandal earlier this year related to this, and this is about online therapy. So mental health apps collecting data in those situations where people believe that they have a very high level of confidentiality, not necessarily privacy, but confidentiality with the disclosures that they're making to their counselor or therapist, but finding out, no. And there's very little law that comes into play to help them. HIPAA doesn't cover apps. HIPAA only covers those covered entities. It's a very narrow range of organizations or people. So what do we do? So Talkspace, this happened in June, where a couple of senators started sending letters to apps that were online therapy or talk therapy apps. Why? Because in March of this year, it came out that the apps, so here's the problem. The apps have a problem. One, how do we keep going if we don't have money? Two, how do we make money if not for the regular way that startups make money? And that is three, advertising or confidentiality. So we have a collision between startup culture and therapy culture and therapy expectations. Therapy expectations lost, startup culture won, and so it was found out that BetterHelp, Talkspace, a couple of other apps were mining the text of the therapy sessions and allowing not just themselves to use it, but allowing third parties to use that mined data for analysis. For what? Why? So they can make inferences and predictions about people. This very private, sensitive information being collected and analyzed and used to make assumptions, predictions about us in these situations where people are their most vulnerable. What do we do with organizations that engage in this type of behavior? What is the fallout? What happens? Well, here's the possibility for law to come into place. And when we're looking for remedies, we see that there's a couple of different ways we can go with the law, right? There could be criminal charges, right? Did you lie? Was there some criminal law, whether it's state or federal, that you violated? So like, if I didn't know I was being recorded, perhaps in a certain states, if it's a two-party state, then maybe I could try a wiretap or eavesdropping law. If it is some kind of fraud related to me sending you money for therapy, maybe some kind of bank or wire fraud law, and there could be jail time. Those usually will not work, right? So maybe criminal charges are off the table. But what about civil charges, right? So we don't have unfortunately in the United States, we don't have an omnibus federal privacy statute or data protection. We're failing on that big time, right? But we have cobbled together from the states and other privacy-ish or data protection-ish laws, some possible remedies, right? But it really depends on the sector, and it really depends on the state that you're in. If you're in California, man, you might have some really great protection. If you are in Florida, maybe not so much. If you are in Colorado, yeah, they just passed something. But what does the text say, and who does it go after? And could talk therapy be one of those organizations, or do they fall below the threshold for the number of people who use that? So really, what is the remedy? And it depends on the issue. Let me give you an example. States, BIPA. So the Illinois Biomedical Information Privacy Act. It works for citizens or residents, I should say, of the state of Illinois. And they say if an organization without consent uses a unique biomedical identifier, which can be broadly construed, then that organization, one, has to give you notice and you have to consent. If they don't, they can be charged and fined up to $5,000 per instance of violation. So this has led up to several settlements, of course, but also lawsuits with relation to tech organizations. There's a few of them, and this is not all of them in any case, in any like wise, and they keep going on. So BEPA was passed in 2008, it's 2022, and organizations are still getting hammered in Illinois only, though. Other states have some biometrics, privacy statutes, but many of them are very narrowly defined and only focus on, say, facial recognition. But while face and your countenance is a very well-known biometric identifier, it's not the only one. What do you do then with things like voice? What do you do with heartbeat? What do you do with other unique identifiers, including perhaps your voice in your confidential therapy session as well? There's nothing left for you if you're in those other states. But BEPA says we're going strong. Here's a couple examples. Snap agreed to a $35 million settlement based on the use of filters that go over your face using Snapchat. Facebook, another facial recognition case, use of Facebook pixels, or I'm sorry, the Google Pixel, but then Facebook, another facial recognition system. Google also, another facial recognition case. But look at the amounts here. So 35 million, Facebook, I believe with the Patel case, it was $550 million dollar settlement. And then of course the Google $100 million settlement. This is nothing. Now, I'm gonna put that in context. $100 million to Facebook is nothing. $550 million to Facebook, to Google is nothing. To us, it's like, oh my God. To these organizations, it's nothing. But then look at what happens, right? 550 million, but like the amount of folks in the class action lawsuit means that you as an individual only stand to possibly get up to $397. I'll take it. But what is my data worth? We're getting to the question. And not just my data, what am I worth? I believe in the Snapchat case, there's a possibility of between 58, I'm good at this. Between $58 and $117. I'll still take it, but what does that, how am I valuing myself? Or how are we valuing people? And more importantly, what about the data? Like, the problem is the data. The problem is I continue to be caught in the dragnet. So I get my $58, Facebook gets to keep my information and continue to use it. Not just me, of course, pools and pools of people in this net. So what's a real remedy? You get paid one time and it's over. I'm supposed to be satisfied with $50, $300, $400, while Facebook gets to make billions, gets to make new machine learning models trained on on me, or what they've taken, and then make more money, sell it to other organizations, sell access to that data to other organizations and get paid by them billions, and I get $50. Is it a fair trade-off? That's the question. So I turn to the law of equity, because civil law, to me, is failing me. It's failing me. So the question is, what do we want to deal with? Do we want to deal with equity? Do we want to deal with property? Or do we want to deal with contracts? Equity says we're going to give you the correct restitution for the injury that you sustained and could possibly sustain going further forward. Property says who owns this, and the property owner perhaps can or is owed what their property is. And then contract says, what's the agreement? What did you say? This is where consent fails us, right? Consent says, okay, yeah, you can use this data. And so I could be bound by the terms of the contract that I consented to. And that leaves a lot of us, again, without remedy and without true recourse related to what it is we need dealing with data. So trust is the remedy that I'm thinking about. Regular trust law is like the properties, the will and estates law, right? If you study for the bar, trusts and estates or wills and estates is one of those things. You create this mechanism under your state law, and trust is a complex, and it doesn't have to be, it could be a really simple thing. You can go to a bank and the bank can be a trustee, some other third party could be a trustee, and the trustee is the person who's in charge. And you say, okay, I want to put my house in trust for my kid. And that means that somebody's going to look after that house to make sure that your child, whatever the terms are, is able to get that house and use that house for however long under the terms of the trust. So you need a trustee, so the person who will be responsible. You need a trustor, the person who like puts the things into the trust. This is all imaginary, of course. And then you need something of value or some things of value. And you say, I'm going to put this in here for the benefit of this person or these people. The trustee then has a duty or duties. They're called fiduciary duties. Basically, if you don't fulfill them, you can be penalized as a trustee. So things like duty of care, duty of loyalty. Basically, you are responsible, so you need to act as a responsible person or organization in this position would. So it's all supposed to be for the benefit of the people in the trust. So what happens when you want to create a trust that benefits based on data? So this is the kind of trust that it's not new, but it's become super popular in the past couple of years, and it's called the data trust. The Open Data Institute, Sir Tim Berners-Lee's, one of his organization, just calls a data trust very simply a legal structure that provides independent stewardship of data. Basically, it's a contract. It says, okay, this group of people and or organization says we have data, we want to pool it together for mutual benefit, and we will be bound by these rules that we make together. So it's like a cooperative governance structure over data. Data trusts have been piloted across the world, India, the UK. There are several data trusts, independent, small data trusts in the United States, South America as well. I'm calling them data trusts, but they're also called other things, data cooperatives or co-ops, all around the world. A couple of examples that made news related to data trusts in the past couple of years. So if you remember Sidewalk Toronto, it was a proposed smart city or a smart segment of a city near the waterfront in Toronto. And Sidewalk Labs, which was a Google subsidiary at the time, proposed to Toronto, hey, give us this, we're gonna make this smart city. And when people push back, because we know smart places basically are smart because they collect a lot of data, when people push back because of the data protection, privacy issues, Sidewalk Labs proposed, oh, we'll put all the data in a trust so they could be beneficial for people in that Toronto neighborhood. It didn't go over well, nobody believed them. And so this kind of is a failed possibility for data trust. One, it failed because there was no buy-in, there was no mutually agreed upon pooling of data. It was, we're gonna take this and then you all could use it when we say you possibly can use it. And people didn't really just, trust a Google connected organization. Another example around the same time was DeepMind Health had gotten access to some of the NHS medical records. And they were using it, DeepMind is DeepMind, and they were using it for training data. And one of the suggestions was this is going to be a data trust, and it'll be useful for all different kinds of medical organizations or healthcare organizations to get access to this trust. Again, another one of a lot of concern because there wasn't buy-in from the people who would be involved. So a data trust would, a functional one that you'd probably get a lot of buy-in would be, we all agree to participate in this trust. Examples in the United States that are independent and fully functioning, there are folks that have data trusts related to fishing data. So groups of fisher people have come together to post data about the best fishing grounds and keep that within the trust, right? We know where the best places to take our boats. We've collected this data over years and years and years. We want to keep it in-house. We'll share it with only the people in the trust because we believe what? They're environmentally safe. They're not going to overfish. If we keep it between this small group, then only they will know. So we have a governance structure we set up governing how this body of knowledge can be used and by who. So that's an example. There are other data trusts related to health data. Certain indigenous tribes, specifically in the Pacific Northwest, have said, if you researchers want to come and use our data, guess what? You have to follow the rules of our organization, our governance structure. Get permission, be respectful, know about our traditions, only behave in certain ways. Data trust. We have created a governance structure to protect ourselves, to protect our value in this kind of data. So those are examples where a data trust actually works. What about constructive trust? This is the one I think is really interesting. And it's important to note that constructive trusts are usually used in the analog sense. It is, okay, I have a $5,000, Tony steals my $5,000, goes buys a used car. I sue. The court could give me a constructive trust. They say, Tony, you can't do anything with that car. That car is in trust now for Jasmine because you used goods that didn't belong to you, that you stole, you got illegally, and they should only benefit the person you stole from. So it's usually like normal property, regular property. If we could move them into the digital age, into the data age, perhaps we could get somewhere with data trust. So a constructive trust is a legal fiction, right? It is, Tony, you can't sell the car. It's not like, Tony, you have to put the car in a certain garage. It can only be used in a certain way. Kind of, right? But it's a remedy in equity, right? We're talking about you or the person who committed fraud or unjust enrichment. They got something from someone else fraudulently without their permission, and they're benefiting from it. So this kind of answers the question, what about the data? So if an organization continues to benefit from data they got through fraud, through deception, through other means that were outside the bounds of consent, why couldn't we use this equitable remedy to put people, one, in near about the space that they would have been had they not had their data taken, but also the opportunity to be involved with governing how that data is used going forward. There is also thinkers, Jonathan Zittrain, Balkin, other people who've talked about using fiduciary duty with respect to tech firms. Like, I go on Facebook, I'm not just a user, but because I am a user, Facebook, Google, Twitter, whoever owes me a duty now. Not just the terms of service, but also to behave in ways that are good for me concerning the data they collect. So what does that mean? It means that if they violate those duties, then we have to have some kind of remedy for those violations, not just monetary either. But we haven't figured out what that could look like. Perhaps a constructive trust, perhaps saying, okay, Facebook, Google, United Health, you are now bound to behave in certain ways that should or must benefit those people who are in this trust, whose data you have. And if you don't, well, there's ways of punishing, but also because you are bound by these fiduciary duties, then you have to make sure that people are benefiting, those people are benefiting. So what could that look like? Example from the commercial genetic database field, Family Tree DNA admitted it was sharing genetic data with the FBI. Some people say, oh, that's fine, because we want to make sure law enforcement has access to all the information it needs to solve cases. I would say, no, you can't just skip over or do an end run around the Constitution. But so in this case, you had Family Tree DNA, one of those commercial databases where people were trying to find out who they are and perhaps find out their relatives, and they hadn't opted into sharing. That's the important part. They said they hadn't checked the box, I want to share. Other people had, but Family Tree DNA didn't limit to the people who had said yes. They used everybody. What do you do with that? With an organization that has said yes when you said no, or haven't affirmatively said yes? Another example, but on a different range, particular apps on iPhones, let me throw Androids in there as well, caught when you're using the app, they would do screen recordings. Like, where are you looking? Also, if you click off, what other apps are you opening? And they were screen recording this, and this is the kind of surreptitious data collection they were involved in. Okay, they could give us money, but they still have the screen recordings. Can we force them to partition data? Can we force them to hold data in certain ways for us that could be useful for us later, or that we can create a governance structure for that would benefit those of us in that commons? is the question. We have some questions to resolve. What does unjust enrichment mean? There's no federal law related to unjust enrichment. We have states. And you know, states have different requirements. There's a general idea of what unjust enrichment is. You know, that definition I gave you, you got something through means from another person that makes them poor and enriches you, basically. But there are certain elements to the law in different states that could not transfer over. So we need to have a uniform idea of what unjust enrichment means. What will state AGs do? Will this just be a state attorneys general kind of action? What will the Federal Trade Commission do? Or what could they possibly do? Or DOJ and other federal agencies with respect to forcing organizations to hold or partition data. Then the other big issue with constructive data trusts is this idea of the adequate remedy. The law says if there's an adequate remedy, we won't make them the bad party, the bad guys. We won't make them create a constructive trust. So if Facebook settles with me for $550 million, that might be considered an adequate remedy, even though they still have the data. What that means is we need to have a rethinking or an advancement in our thinking about the implications of data and how data can be perpetuated and used over and over and over again for a long time. You would think that would be kind of old hat by now because we have public records and we've had public records laws for a very long time, and those public records have been used over and over again, even till this point right now where public records are one of the major sources of machine learning training data, but that hasn't been remedied. So what would an adequate remedy look like? 5 days ago, Arizona AG announced an $85 million settlement with Google. As I said, every day there's something. $85 million settlement with Google related to bad actions by and data collection by the tech firm. 85 million. Roughly 80 million will go into like state coffers. 5 million will go to the AG like education programs or whatever. What about the residents of Arizona? What's the remedy for them? What's the restitution? Again, the question is, how do you put them back in the position they would have been had Google or Facebook or your healthcare organization not behaved in the manner that they did? 80 million is great for the state. It does nothing for you on its face. Is that an adequate remedy? Again, that's the question. Is money going to be the adequate remedy? But what if we can establish an organization or a mechanism like a constructive trust that says you need to keep this so we can find out, one, how to govern it, but two, how we can benefit from that. There's information, location data, for example, that could be useful. Can it help us with things like traffic patterns? Can it help us with routing? Can it help us with rethinking open spaces, bike lanes? Absolutely. What we don't want is for Google to take that location data and then sell it to, you know, the federal government, whoever. How can we best benefit or gain a remedy from this data collection that goes beyond money, which we may never see, or it's only a very small amount? What are our remedies? And then, okay, we create this constructive trust. What's next? Number one thing is governance. Who's going to be, one, a part of the cooperative community? How do we identify those people who are in the trust or touched by the trust? And then, and I don't think this is going to be as hard as perhaps, we think it might be, but can the community create its own data use principles, its own models for data use and analysis, and its own rules? I think some people will say, oh, well, not everybody is as literate about, say, machine learning or uses of different kinds of data, and that may be true, but people know how to live. People know how to protect their own privacy. People know who they do and do not want to be looking into their business, however you define it. So there's an opportunity to get people involved in community governance. I think organizations or initiatives like All of Us have attempted community-based, at least participatory, research related to those kinds of things. And there's good and bad in that, but it's something that has to be tried. Why? Because as I mentioned earlier, there are certain communities of people who are disparately impacted by data collection and then use. And then what if we have this data in trust and we say it's not good for anything positive? What are the remedies then? A good remedy is data abolition. That means get rid of it. There are acts and initiatives by the federal government that have been announced, and there have been cases announced where, for example, they have found that an algorithm and its connecting points are just, I'll just say bad, for lack of other words, right? Unlawful, leading to disparate impacts, and there's no remedying it. And so what needs to happen? Disgorgement, it's called. That means you have to get rid of it. It is a very valid remedy. Get rid of it. Nobody gets to use it. There's value, but it's valuable for really negative effects. So that's the possibility. So this is what I'm proposing, thinking about. Can we force organizations to hold data and not use it for their benefit, but for our benefit? And then create governance structures for that trust and rules related to it that allow us to advance in communal ways from the use of the data, and at the same time, not possibly be further harmed by data use and collection. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. McNealy. I know we have I think someone's monitoring the chat for questions, so put questions into the chat, please do that. I think we'll start with taking questions in person first, and it looks like we have at least one question.
So yes, thank you so much for this talk. Phenomenal. I have a million questions for you. I will try to narrow it down to a couple. And so as someone who was doing work on period trackers 3 or 4 years ago and having some dystopian future things, and see, look, it happened. I guess one of the questions I have for you is, in focusing on the actors, are the bandwidth, whoever the we is who would bring these actions, when we know that, yes, there are developers like Google and Facebook, but I mean, when we were looking at these period tracking apps, some of them were being developed by like people in Belarus. So understanding we have a lot of very sensitive data that is being held both by a very diverse set of individuals and also ones for whom presumably the US has very little jurisdictional authority.
And so
I'll stop myself there. So, but then I'm thinking like, how would we operationalize this, recognizing that, I mean, it's whack-a-mole. We have a million different actors who potentially be doing bad things.
Yeah, and so this is not a remedy, I think, that can be by itself. There are other requirements that need to happen. A couple of those include regulation that creates or forces app stores to do a better job at policing, so to speak, what's being made available. To a certain extent, Apple has done this to a certain extent, but for commercial reasons. Maybe Google does it to another certain extent, but I think there's more that could possibly be done. And I think there's more that possibly could be done with Amazon. Like, the regulatory space is available for there to be concerted policy creation related to what people encounter and who they encounter in the marketplace. I don't think that has been as well regulated as it possibly should. So there's no reason for me to use whatever kind of app and look at the privacy policies and not know exactly what's happening, but in a way that I actually understand. We've had that conversation for the past couple of decades now about transparency. I don't think transparency alone cuts it either. I think these like transnational data flow cooperatives or I guess regulations can be helpful. In the United States, though, I think one of the number one things that has to happen is for there to be an omnibus data protection privacy law. And for that, and when that happens, it could possibly change then how organizations, even attempting to enter the marketplace in the United States, have to behave. But you're right, it is, it'll be very rough with the global market related to data collection and where data is held. But I think this is a possibility, one possibility for moving forward for remedies, especially since these small operators are not always acting solely on what they get, but they're also acting on what the big players have. They ask for access, they buy access, they use training data from the larger organizations. So this is all connected, but it is very complex, as you guys.
Thank you so much for that really, really interesting talk. I was wondering, so my parents, I grew up in Central Oregon, and my parents live near Prineville, and Facebook just built this just gigantic $2 billion, 4.6 million square foot data center. And I was wondering if like just the brute materiality, like the cloud isn't in the cloud, it's in these. So I wonder if there are ways, like legal mechanisms to regulate those facilities, and if that could be a way at a higher level of preventing some of the harms that we all know are sort of ongoing.
I think a lot of environmental science folks are in that realm because data centers just take up a lot of energy. They are an environmental problem, and they have been for a while. I think there's some emerging research on using environmental regulations to help regulate in that way. Now, with what happens in the EPA, I'm not sure. where that might go, but it is a possibility, and there's also state EPAs as well. So that could possibly be a way.
I see there's a question in the Q&A. Can you,
Yes, so David Myers asks, CRISP has been around for 20 years. Is it a model for a public-private partnership to create trusts as you are suggesting? Do other countries have models that work to protect PHI data?
What has been around for
CRISP
has been around for years.
has been around for 20 years. Is it a model for public-private partnership to create trusts as you are suggesting?
Yeah, so it's been around for many years, but I want to make clear that this is not necessarily a public-private partnership that I'm asking for. I'm saying directly, the private, you have something that doesn't belong to you. So we're not partnering with you, we're telling you this is how you have to behave. And so while Chris may allow for that more collaborative kind of interactions between the public and the private, what I'm asking for here is we regulate in a certain way to say when you as a private organization have something or have gotten something that doesn't belong to you, this is what you have to do. So it's less of a partnership. It's not a partnership at all. It's more of a regulatory action.
And then the second part of that question was, do other countries have models that work to protect, I assume it's private health information data?
Yeah, so there are a lot of countries that have passed laws, data protection laws, and that have specific health data regulations, but none that force the creation of kind of this trust corpus thing. The GDPR may force deletion in certain respects, limited respects. The CCPA in California has certain GDPR-like aspects, but there's no country that I know of that forces the maintenance of a corpus until we find out what we're going to do with it. Yeah.
so we only have, we're going to have one, right? Yeah. Okay, so we only have 7 minutes. So maybe, and I saw there were a few more hands, maybe we can take like 2 questions if there's at once, and then we can get to as much as you can. So Joe, and was there someone else who had, okay, and Odia?
I can differ. I thought mine was quick. I just wonder if you could say a little bit more about disparate impact and where that fits in. So who is being disparately affected and how does it affect your model of thinking about this?
Yeah, so disparate impacts depends on context, of course, but there are certain protected classes that we understand, and we've seen in research over and over again. Race, of course, income level, gender, and other factors, immigration status, depending on the context, are disparately affected by that collection and the training data. We know that data is used for various industries and various sectors, and the patterns or predictions made by data that is collected in various ways, but many of those ways are based in biased systems. So we think of the judicial system, for example, as disparately impacted people of color, Black people in particular in the United States. And so if you train the data to predict whether a person is a good risk for probation versus incarceration, you're looking at data that has been skewed in a certain way, then you will see that if this person comes up before the judge and you're using whatever the system is, I won't say the name of the most popular one, but whatever the system is, then if it's trained on data that has been collected in a certain kind of system, it may say if that person is Black, they are less of a good choice for probation and incarceration. Why? Because the pattern in the data says that usually a person with this factor may not be a good risk. Even if, and we've seen both the ProPublica report, we've seen the academic research, even if those people that come up before them have the same record.
So,
The factor is one is white and one is black. Yeah.
so does that mean that those groups that are disparate impacted then somehow prioritize in terms of a trust remedy, or how do you?
I would say that those people would have a priority as far as participation in the governance process of the trust. I would say that whether this is medicine or the judicial system or whatever other kind of sector or industry, when certain people are most affected by those actions or activities, they need to have more of a say. Usually they're not involved in the ways, or not asked to be involved in the ways that they could possibly be with respect to decisions that are made about them, that are going to affect them. They're usually ignored, or things are implemented on them without adequate input in any way. So to actively have participatory governance, it needs to have the people who are most affected participating in mind.
Okay, last question, what do you got?
Thank you for your talk. My question is about what the implications might be for human subjects research and health research when it comes to accessing this data. Maybe it's because I don't know how I trust it works, but even being able to get temporary access to that data or public data that people will post on like Twitter or Facebook, and being able to use that for research, and what framing data and privacy, what implications that might have for us when we're doing public health research on publicly available information, or even information we get permission to use by the research center.
Yeah, so this is one of the thoughts I had a lot. There is the possibility that public health research could be really beneficial, right? Using the data. But at the same time, we know that we have a long history of public health not being necessarily beneficial for everybody in the United States. So this is why active community governance will be necessary. Now, will everyone agree with allowing public health researchers to use that? Absolutely not. But those reasons that they have that would be valid. Very valid, very real. I think it would be incumbent upon public health researchers to make their case for why they should be allowed. What are the benefits? What are the drawbacks? In more ways than perhaps the IRB tells you to make a claim, right? And that will require a participatory framework that public health researchers and other researchers will have to really involve themselves into, and not be like parachutists into communities. So.
Great, we have 2 minutes, I don't know, it's probably, is there another
Sorry,
question?
there's one more question.
All right, can we let's squeeze in one more question.
Okay. This is from Anna Mastriani. Are you familiar with the approach of Sage Bionetworks in their governance toolkit and privacy toolkit in the realm of health research?
Yes.
I'm wondering whether their approaches might be helpful at all in informing how we address some of the challenges in the management of data.
Yes, I am familiar with SAGE and its rethinking of consent and its governance toolkit. I think the research they've done has been really great related to thinking how communities can govern data. I think we can push more too. I think it's the starting point, and by no means the end point, but it is one framework, grouping of frameworks that could be really beneficial. Yes.
Awesome. Well, join me in thanking Dr. McNealy.